Lancashire County Council. Welcome to viewers watching on the webcast. Welcome to members of the Budget Scrutiny Committee who are joining us this morning. Welcome to the officers who are in attendance, and of course welcome to all members of the Internal Scrutiny Committee itself. We are webcast today, and it would help, I think, if it gets too overcrowded and we start losing people, that people turn their cameras off and use their microphones. Obviously when they're speaking, camera it's quite all right, but most of the time I find that if all the cameras are on, people sort of drop off, and I've turned mine off already. So that's just a comment. So the first item is apologies. Do we have any apologies? No, I don't believe we do. And replacements, there are no substitutions today. Disclosure of personal, pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. If you do have one, please state the reason. Nothing there. Okay, thank you. The next item, minutes of the committee meeting held on the 12th of November.
Move you signed them, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, agreed. Let's move on. You. Item 4. Welcome to AJ, who's going to present us with some slides, discussion and presentation generally regarding specialisation. Just hold on, I've got to admit somebody, that's it. So when you're ready, AJ, start with your discussion and your presentation, which we're looking forward to. Thank you. Can everybody see this? Yes. Oh, one thing, if you wish to speak, can you wait till he's finished his presentation and then put your hand up in the normal way, and we'll take you in the order we see them. Thank you. Thank you, AJ.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and you can see the slides on the screen, and I'm hoping technology allows me to move the slides on at the same time at the move on for yourselves. But if not, probably if somebody could wave the hand and let me know, and I'll revert to a plan B. But yes, good morning everybody. My name's Ajay Sethi, Head of Commercialisation, and today there are two appendixes. Appendix A, which is essentially the slides I'll take you through this morning, and Appendix B is the draft policy around the application of fees and charges. In terms of just setting the context, you'll all be well aware and appreciate that Lancashire is a large and complex organisation. Some past approaches to income generation, fees and charges have been, and good ideas have lacked structure in terms of how we progress, and also clearly the pandemic has had an impact in terms of the progress as resources have been deployed into different areas. This update builds on Cabinet's approval of our commercial blueprint back in August 2020, and I'll take you through in terms of how various aspects of the commercial programme are being built and how we're approaching these. And as I mentioned, Appendix B will take you through the sort of application of fees and charges. It is draft, and the key recommendation for colleagues today is I'm very much seeking your scrutiny on the approach, but particularly the fees and charges policy, and any comments and advice in terms of how we might enhance the programme are clearly very much welcome. Okay, so if I move on to slide 2. If you've not, I've just moved the slide on. If it hasn't moved on for you, if somebody could just let me know, because this has happened to me in the past. In terms of the commercial blueprint, this was approved back in August 2020. I won't go through the detail or each of the words on the slide. You'll be pleased to know, but in essence, the key essence of the blueprint, it provides us with a strategic platform, and also a key objective is that all that we do within the council should have wider benefit, and that's wider benefit to supporting either economic, educational, health or social benefits to our communities. Activity should meet at least one of the key objectives that you can see there. And in short, commercialisation is open to interpretation from individual to individual, council to council. But in essence, for LCC, commercialisation is essentially creating the environment that promotes commercial practice, supporting the effective management of cost, and also reaching decisions or supporting how we reach decisions, particularly for income generating IDs and ensuring that they are viable and appropriate, but also supporting the sort of maximising eligible fees and charges into the council. The blueprint, just to recap, covers major themes in terms of skills and capacity, fees and charges, and you can see from that in terms of how those themes are presented, but also some of the key aspects that they should be covering. The next slide, and conscious I'm going through these at a pace. This slide is what I describe as the architecture slide. So essentially, on the right hand side, you'll see what I describe as sort of key building blocks for the organisation. So 6 key blocks in terms of agreeing what commercialisation means, setting a clear objectives, having a strategic approach, and creating that culture and value, and so on and so forth. On the left hand side, we have the key vehicles by which we are looking to ensure that those commercialisation blocks are supported. So in essence, if I start on the left, the commercial blueprint is very much around supporting the blocks 1, 2 and 3 in terms of vision, what it means for us, and creating and having that strategic approach. We have developed a commercial learning programme, and I'll take you through each of those in a little bit more detail in a moment. And the commercial learning programme is very much in support of blocks 2, 3 and 4 in terms of particularly around culture and ensuring we support staff in having the right skills and capacity to deliver and initiate commercial practice. We also have a commercial network across the council and commercial champions, and again they are supporting blocks 2, 3 and 4. And additionally, we have put in place a commercial business planning methodology and very much supporting blocks 5 and 6. And I think blocks 5 and 6 are particularly pertinent because you will be aware of key challenges on some councils across the country in terms of the areas or the sectors in which they have started to develop commercial ventures. So that one is particularly pertinent for us today. In terms of the commercial learning programme, the programme has been developed and is currently being assessed by colleagues in terms of audience and impact. But in short, the learning programme covers 6 core modules: commercial awareness and thinking, strategic decision making, sales and marketing, people and change, systems and processes, and financial management, health, trading and governance. Under each of those, you should be able to see just some aspects in terms of what they are covering. And additionally, we have additional modules, if you wish to call them that, which help take staff through our commercial business planning methodology and how they might be applied to certain ventures. In terms of the champions, and these all link back to the architecture slide, we have approximately 60 commercial champions from across the council in place, and for ease, I've highlighted in bold some of the key aspects just to focus in on. The commercial champions are representative of both statutory and discretionary services from across the council and represent all directorates. In essence, the core responsibilities for those individuals will be champion the council's commercial blueprint, and particularly when we're trying to create that model that assists cascading thinking across almost 12,000 staff. I think you'll appreciate the way in which we're approaching this, but very much act as an in-house, in-service directorate point of contact for issues, disseminating learning and practice, but also acting as a broker between the service, between the directorate, but also within wider colleagues from across the council. Additionally, members of the or fewer members of the commercial network have also formed a commercial champions have formed a commercial network, and that network is in particular looking at a system where we can achieve corporate coherence in areas of common policy, and the key example here, or the key focus of that network, has been around fees and charges, and or the application of fees and charges to date, and the draft policy that's in Appendix B is part of the end product of colleagues supporting how we support practice. Just to touch on Appendix B in a little bit more detail, is that it is there to help create a level of consistency and also expectation from across the council, supporting practice, but also supporting that eligible income is maximised. This network will also focus on other aspects, particularly around identification of issues and barriers affecting our commercial activity, but also looking across the piece around best practice and influencing and acting as an internal challenge to our work. One aspect just to highlight here is additionally is I did survey our commercial champions some time ago as part of what they see as their key commercial challenges. And as I mentioned at the beginning, sort of commercial is not just about making profits. It's not about making money, but also management of cost, but ensuring that also any other activity is supporting our key priorities. In terms of needs, colleagues did identify actually greater support around, particularly on strategy and policy, and hence the policy in Appendix B is in part to support some of their needs, but also greater work around financial modelling, forecasting, but understanding the legal basis by which we can operate. In support of that, and the sort of the last strand of the architecture is that we have put in place, we've developed and have created a commercial business planning methodology. It adopts a 5-case methodology process, and you can see from that it does support in ensuring that any activity supports strategic objectives, priorities, and that through that strategic case, it's exploring the options, exploring best value in terms of the economic case, but then is able to demonstrate viable and structured delivery, but also the additional aspects there you'll be able to see in terms of the financial and management case. This has been designed from taking sort of what's considered best practice from national government, but also takes from the private sector as well. But it is designed to be intuitive rather than and supporting officers and colleagues in terms of building that case, but assessing all the key things they would need to consider. I was conscious of time and to open this up for wider questions, and then bringing that together. This slide just describes how those strands and the areas by which both myself but also with colleagues come together and accessing sort of support from other parts of the council, be that comms, be that finance, be that legal, but then also how we focus in on our assets. Okay, conscious. I hope you appreciate the sort of the PowerPoint format. Sometimes there's a lot of information that's been shared, and sometimes sharing that information via diagrams and pictures shortens the number of words that you would have to read, but also helps to highlight that since Scrutiny last looked at aspects of income generation, that there's been some significant developments in terms of our approach and our thinking in order to support both colleagues, but also the communities of Lancashire. So I'd like to, if I stop there and opened up to questions.
Thank you, AJ. first of all, regarding the presentation, it is an excellent presentation, and the PowerPoint presentation is so clear and easy to understand. So thank you for that. There will be questions, and I see Eric has already put a hand up, but I'm just going to start the ball rolling with a question which might throw you a little bit, but can you give us an example of successful commercialisation project which we've had over the last, say, 7 or 8 months, and also one that's failed, and the reason for the success and the reason for the failure, if one's failed, of course.
Yes. No, it's a good question. I think if I'd probably come back to this slide, and I think this success is very much centered on the best practice that I can share with colleagues around how an activity both is discretionary but also supports local economies to thrive. And whilst it's not necessarily recent, I think it gives the best example of practice, and that would be the school catering service. It's a significant employer. It works in over 500 schools across the county, and also it adopts the foundation living wage. Much of its supply base, in terms of is I think 75% of its supply base is local, so therefore both supporting the local economy and also supporting a reduction in terms of the distance much of those goods would travel, and also that recognition of its work has been recognised at a national level. It did receive Local Authority Caterer of the Year, and I'm not sure if I mentioned already, it does employ staff on the foundation living wage, and I think that's an example of where successful practice is at place, but also how a discretionary function can have wider benefits, because it also supports the reduction of salts and fats within school meals, but whilst providing a benefit and a service to those schools. That's just an example. Whilst it's not recent, it's been in the council for many years. It supports the intent of the objectives, but also is one for us to hold up as best practice as well. In terms of failures, I think it's probably more difficult to respond to right now, in that there are a number of commercial ventures that are being considered. Some of those, I have to admit, our pace has been affected for a number of reasons, not least resources being deployed in response to the pandemic, and those are still in train, so have still yet to go through what I've described to you in terms of some of the practice.
Thank you very much for that. So the first question comes from Councillor Erica Lewis. Erica.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole, and thank you for the presentation. As Councillor O'Toole noted, it was a very good presentation, and I think a really nicely thought out piece of work. I guess I have two somewhat divergent questions, but the second one you may be able to say isn't your area. So one of the issues that has arisen at Lancaster City Council in terms of commercialisation and developing commercial services is a tension between when the council operates a venue or runs a business. So we have a very successful commercial waste collection service, and other things like that. And at various points, this causes friction with our community, because they say, well, why are you competing against residents? You've got an advantage in, marketing and reach, in, historical ownership of property. Why are you competing against local businesses? So I wondered if you could speak to that and how we're thinking about that, managing that issue in this context, because we have very few options in terms of revenue raising as local government, and this has to be one of them. The other question I have, and this is the one you might be able to say actually not my space, is what is the overlap between the conversations we're having around commercialisation and the conversations the county's higher education institutions are having around commercialisation. Just so everybody remembers, I work for the University of Cumbria, based at the Lancaster campus, and this is one of the projects that I'm involved with at work. So I know that from when I worked at Edge Hill that they have a very close relationship with West Lancs. I know that Lancaster University has just signed an MOU with Lancaster City Council around closer working. And although I don't have a lot of details, I have heard some really exciting stuff about a partnership between Imperial University and Hammersmith and Fulham Council. And I'm meant to be organising to take myself to London to visit. But that's about recognising that Imperial lives in Hammersmith and Fulham Council and talking about how they can increase the commercial spin-offs out of both organisations, because obviously business growth locally helps with business spreads. So if the second one I should talk to somebody else about, that's cool. But if you can answer the first one and the second one, if you have any insight, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. In terms of the first one, I think you completely acknowledge it's a consideration that any activity needs to have a view on. As part of that, we've from a new enterprise perspective, we're very cognizant of that being one of the factors that any initiative needs to have in mind. So we built that question into the business planning process. So in terms of the methodology, and I'll just refer back to this slide. So within the strategic case, that is a very explicit question in terms of having an awareness and an understanding of the practice would have either as an equality impact analysis or whether it's a social impact analysis. So that due consideration is given to that. Because you're quite right, it's something that we need to be mindful of in terms of our reach and our impact. And therefore it has been built into in terms of the decision making process. I think additionally the flip side of that, so it's just to give you reassurance, it is a consideration. I think the flip side is it comes back to our breadth and scale and depth as a county council, is that in some instances new enterprises will emerge and develop because there's a lack of availability within the market, and I have examples of why we've done that in the past in response to certain challenges either the community has or some of our key partners have, and we have created models where we're supporting that customer base in response to either a lack of quality or a lack of availability, or as an evolution of that relationship. And so yes, I think that covers the first question. I think in terms of the second, I probably need a bit more context in terms of the HEI dimension. I am aware we do have a number of programs where we work closely with the HEIs, particularly around sort of bespoke delivery, but also within us accessing certain faculties, particularly around research and development and closer working, and there will be closer work, particularly around our economic development dimension there, and also how we have in the past, but also in the future, we integrate with HEIs, particularly around the economic recovery. I'm not aware, and I'm conscious, and I think I'm now thinking, should I be aware of any specific commercial venture that we're exploring directly with the HEI right now? If those conversations have started, they've not come through my door in terms of being at a point in which we're about to take them through the business planning methodology. So I probably need to explore that one in a bit more detail in terms of the sort of the key aspects. But I am aware we do have quite a number of different relationships with our HEIs across the county, and some of those will be classical transactional, and some will be considering joint ventures in certain ways, but I just don't have that level of detail.
Yeah, and one of the reasons Lancaster University and Lancaster City Council wrote the MOU was because there were so many connections between the two that people couldn't get their arms around it. So I would get some directly because I was a doctoral student there, and other, like, they're just going in all sorts of directions. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to draw on the best of both the University of Cumbria and Lancaster University in helping with the South Lancaster developments. So that might be a conversation that interests you. And if I get any useful information about Imperial, I'll share. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Schofield.
Thank you, David. Yes, first of all, it's a compliment from me on the quality of the presentation and the diagrams so far. I think to me it's very refreshingly very comprehensive. I'll just restrict my question into one area to do with commercial investment and what's described as our commercial assets. I think that's on slide pages 1 and 6. On the first one, where there's the diagram of culture, leadership and structure, on the right hand side we've got commercial, that's the one, commercial investment, and it mentions portfolio and portfolio management. And as I say, on a later page on 6, in one of the quarters of a circle in the middle, it mentions our commercial assets. The question really is, and I'll just give you a background quickly to where I'm coming from on this, is what is the coverage of that? You may say, well, it could be unlimited, but specifically where I'm coming from on this is what I'm asking for is, does it cover activities, for example, of the County Council's estate service in terms of rental income on land and buildings that they may manage on behalf of LCC? Does it cover the activities of that wholly owned company, LCDL? I'm just trying to remember whether I know it's I'm not sure it's Lancashire Commercial Developments Limited or Lancashire County Developments Limited. But I'd like to know, does it cover their activities, and if so, how? And also, does it cover, when we talk about portfolio management, LCC itself in what's called treasury management? Well, that's basically cash management and borrowing and investment. And on the investment side, there's an investment strategy, and that's approved by the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee from time to time. And there's a meeting of that committee coming up on Monday, 31st of January, and I expect there'll be at least one report from the Director of Investment, Mike Jensen, on giving an update and also recommending a certain strategy to be approved at the County Council budget meeting in early February. So there is a strategy there approved as to what sort of investments are made for the best sustainable returns for the County Council. So I wondered, on those examples I've given, which are 3, do you have any links to that in your own description of commercial investment and commercial assets?
Yeah, no, those are great questions, and essentially the slide that's present now is an acknowledgement in terms of the commercial investments as you've described them there, particularly through Mike. It's in the commercial blueprint. We've acknowledged that actually for that activity, the portfolio management sits within the overall treasury management strategy as you've described. So it's essentially just helping put the jigsaw together, in that it's not a separate strand of work, but it's linking back into that work, because as you described, there's a very clear infrastructure and governance arrangement around that. So that just helps clarify the complexity of that. In terms of
played a blinder, I thought a really good.
Oops, sorry. I think in terms of the LCDL, yes, it's a company in its own right, and therefore it will be governed by its own instruments in that sense. But it is acknowledging that the sort of the wider outside of in-house discretionary activity and statute activity will be part of this proposal. But yes, the final aspect in terms of estates and property, the staff within estates and the property portfolio, it's recognising that there are assets and at times we will generate rental income. And so yes, the application of particularly the fees and charges policy, but also some of the practice that I've described through this will relate to the estates and asset management parts of the service as much as it would any part of the council, particularly where it's looking at realising and looking at the mix of the portfolio management. Whilst much of that has its oversight in terms of the Property Asset Management Board, is when we're looking at the strands of activity, and particularly where the strands of those activities relate to commercial practice, i.e. effective management of cost, or we're looking at different means by which we wanted to negotiate those rental agreements, then actually, yes, it's fully applies to them as it would anybody else in the council.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Alan. Councillor Johnson next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sir, I have a question for you, and it's regarding cost reduction, and no doubt you're doing very well on that subject. It refers to page 12, mainly on the key objectives, and I know the commercial architecture is a vehicle for managing costs, or in your case reducing costs, and there's always a fine line between reducing costs and abdicating responsibility, and I'm referring mainly to the cross-boundary agreements we have on our highways infrastructure. I live near Blackpool. That's where my division is, and we have agreed that Blackpool will take care of some roads, and Lancashire County Council will take some responsibility of Blackpool roads, and that obviously will reduce costs. But once we've given it to Blackpool, we lose sight of it, and unfortunately, I have to say that the cost reduction has a detriment to the image of Lancashire County Council. I just want to make you aware of that, because I'm sure you won't be, but it's certainly one factor to keep in mind. Right, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it was more to note, wasn't it, in terms of factoring in as part of the overall piece of works rather than.
Yes.
No, thank you.
You can't lose sight of that image, whereby it would appear you're concentrating on cost reduction.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we acknowledge that, yes, and hence I think we're changing. Whilst sometimes the change of language might just seem it's a change of language, it's the change of practice that goes behind that. So yes, changing the language to effective management of cost as opposed to cost reduction, I think is the right direction, because it should also build in those considerations, as you noted, that we do need to just be aware of.
I would agree with you, but you can't abdicate responsibility. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we move on. Thank you for that question. Next question is from Councillor Dowding.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I should just say that I'm here as a member of the Budget Scrutiny Review Panel, so I hope it's okay, though, to ask a question on this item.
Before you joined us, I welcome members of the committee as well.
Thank you. So
you're welcome.
Thank you. So thanks very much. I have got two questions. One is I'm just interested to know what you think success will look like, say, in a year and 5 years. So what are the your measurable outcomes, or what would you hope that we might achieve with this? after a year and 5 years. And my other question is, how will you deal with, or how will we as an institution deal with tension between wanting different outcomes, between possible different outcomes between different departments? So just for an example, say, I think actually county has sold all its farm estates or its agricultural estates, but you know, if there's an area where, well, we could commercialize and make money and increase income, but on the other hand, there might be an opportunity to achieve some of the other counties' goals, biodiversity or community support. And where will those dilemmas be discussed if they arise?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. Sorry, or should I say questions? I think in the first one, particularly around success, is that we move. You know, a key outcome for me would be that from every service perspective, there is the very clear view. You know, that actually head directors and heads of service are finding skills, or staff are equipped with either support or guidance or resources that allow them to adopt a commercial practice. I.e., so even if it's nothing to do with about income revenue, but actually when they are looking at proposals, that they are fully aware of those costs. So that's about that we are increasing people's skills and capacity to be able to work in that way. This might seem quite minor, but for me as well, I think getting the breadth of what we mean by commercialisation, I think, is also really important, because for many, commercialisation can appear a dirty word. And particularly in the public sector, it can appear a dirty word in terms of it's about pursuing profit. But in this context, it's very much not about that without having that wider benefit. So getting that clarity in terms of what it means, but then for the workforce and our partners to understand how we are approaching that cost. And I think that's particularly relevant with Appendix B, and hence why Appendix B is presented in the way it is. It's that in order to achieve that outcome, it is about assisting the organisation to have a consistency in terms of its approach and how it adopts the fees and charges policy, but that a policy supporting that, you know, all the opportunities for eligible income are not missed, and actually the opportunities for maximising that eligible income is also maximised. Fees and everything that we do, and I think this is the sort of something, again, I'm probably going into semantics more, but everything we do, whether it's in a commercial capacity, a traded capacity, is actually derived through the application of a fee or a charge. And therefore, you know, adopting the appendix, which Appendix B in this case, is to maximise that. Having those services continually review, respond, but also to understand the impacts is going to be a key outcome additionally. But then actually we have a vehicle now in place where good concepts, good enterprises have the right structure to go through. Staff are aware of that, but also we don't stifle innovation and creativity through that process. And actually, but rather it's more intuitive and support staff to take a concept and move it into something that's an operational in an operational state in order to be delivered. And that would be real success for me in terms of being able to capture people, that creativity, innovation, take it through a structured approach that, and therefore we arrive at a sensible, coherent, but also a fully considered approach, which reduces any risk on political exposure, but also reduces any financial risk, as we've seen across the country of late. And I think it's that latter part where we build in the tensions that you've described there, in terms of how we can approach those tensions. And probably the key area where we will have those discussions over the next 12 to 24 months is probably going to be around electric vehicle infrastructure. in terms of how we approach that and what are the complexities, but also how we work with partners, but also internally in terms of meeting residents' needs and supporting our ambition of net zero, but then also supporting where we have those assets in our organisation, we utilise those assets in the best way that cover costs, but B, have a social value at the same time. And again, that methodology through the business planning methodology would allow us and create that environment for those conversations to be had.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for the question, Councillor Dowding. Move on to Councillor Shedwick next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I compliment you and others have already on the major papers and then your presentation today. Mainly following from the blueprint, I think you've clearly got the right pattern moving forward, commercial learning programme, and the champions. Plainly, as we develop in the outside local government, many companies are able to embrace risk and loss leaders, all that sort of thing. That is a more difficult one, I think, to embed as we go forward. But the question I wanted really to ask you just to elaborate on is obviously the application of fees and charges. I'll get that one out and see in the paperwork. As we've always known, primary responsibility sits with the heads of service and service managers section on fees and charges. So I think that is obviously going to be a challenge to perhaps be more bullish than we've been before, perhaps emulating some of the practices of commercial companies. Would you like to just elaborate on that?
Yes. Apologies, I caught aspects of that, so I think I caught the crux of the question. In terms of the risk that you've highlighted, the business planning methodology will respond to how we manage risk. Understand risk, but also manage risk. And it may well be that Scrutiny would like me to come back just to be able to focus in on that methodology, so you can see it in its fullest detail and how we approach that. And that's that. I'll leave that with you as to whether you wish that to come back. In terms of the application, and this is, I think, is where the voice, the feedback was a little bit sketchy in terms of, yes, the application of the fees and charges policy is very much, or the expectation it creates is around heads of service and service managers to enact on that. I think it's probably fair to say that actually the policy does read in a one-directional way, but within the, as we've described, the policy has been is going through a series of checks and balances, and today is one of those checks and balances, but also with commercial champions. So we will have representatives of services contributing to that document, which is where I'm asking them what additional resources and support do they need in order to be able to enact that policy within the service. So it is very much intended to be a reciprocal arrangement between staff and myself and the commercial network in order to support colleagues, A, understanding how to approach it, but B, in its delivery. I hope that covers the question. I'm just apologies. As I said, some of the maybe the broadband width was a little bit sketchy at that point, but hopefully that covers the question.
No, I think I have. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question. Councillor Hindle.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. My question sort of resonates a little bit with the answer that you gave to Councillor Dowling, insofar as I am one of those people. I've never worked in business. I haven't got a business mindset. I've always, when I've worked, it's been in public services or childcare, that sort of thing. So I was really alarmed. I just felt so uncomfortable reading all the language in it about the business mindset, and to me it just made me feel really uneasy. Because, and I don't know if I'm old-fashioned, but I always feel that the government should provide you with enough money to be able to do the services, so you don't have to worry about all this, and you're going down the wrong route. But that's just the way I am. But what I was concerned about, and it could be undue concern, will some areas be like protected and ring-fenced from this? And I'm thinking in particular something like in social care, where due to austerity they used to be taken, or they used to enjoy going to day centres. Some day centres I believe have closed, some I believe might be running less frequently, or they cannot no longer afford to go to them. So I'm thinking, will this further be detrimental to the most vulnerable or the most people in needs living standards? And that's what worries me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think the short response is no, it's not intended to do that. And I think the essence of this is that if we segment, yes, those things that the council is mandated to do in terms of its statutory responsibilities essentially sit outside of this, but the papers do acknowledge that on occasion that the level of that support centrally has reduced over the years, or is likely to reduce in the future. So therefore what we're creating here is a mechanism by which where we can apply eligible, so those that are appropriate in statute or other commercially, that actually that activity covers the cost of the activity, but the more important aspect is that it also assists in offsetting, rising demand in other areas, i.e. it helps us to be able to create an environment by which the council can support those areas where there is rising demand. So in that essence, it's creating a model by which where we aim to protect as far as possible those statutory functions and our response to those statutory functions, but B, the mechanism to do that is actually where we can apply that behaviour, we do it, but the purpose of doing it is to support exactly those core principles that you've described. So it is really to help support that, and it does acknowledge that we have to be creative and innovative as a council, and not solely rely on central funding.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you're right. I think you just need to sort of lay that on the line for people like me that are not from a business. And, I think the offsetting is a good idea to express clearly, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to I think it was a bit of a political question, so I think it might be useful for a political answer to it as well. Just to really support what Ajay's saying and what Ajay's doing. The end of the day, the whole point of Lancashire County Council is to provide services for the people that need them. It is about that, our whole raison d'etre, to quote a former councillor who would say to us that there's one reason of the residents of Lancashire. That's what we're here to do, and we have a finite amount of money to do so, and yet we sit on huge amounts of land. We've got such a talented and skillful workforce, and so any way in which we can utilize the assets that we have in order to generate more income to be able to spend on the services that matter to the people is something that I think we are absolutely fully behind as an administration. I think every councillor should be fully behind. The idea, it's not about at the detriment of services. Why wouldn't you have a sign on a roundabout and pay and get a business to pay 50 quid for the privilege? If we've got the roundabouts, so why don't we do it? So I think we must fully support this mentality and this attitude and this workforce within the county council, and I very much welcome what Ajay and his team are doing. But as you've rightly pointed out, it's definitely not at the detriment of the delivery of the services that we all need and rely on.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. You don't need to comment on that particular AJ. Next one is Councillor Hind.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole, and brilliant presentation, AJ. Thank you. Commercialisation in the form of subcontractors that highways use means that the company doing the actual work on the roads is more distant from the residents involved. So there is, or can be, a perceived, if not real, lack of communication, especially when a long anticipated project is jettisoned with no notice. Do we need to ensure that LCC reflects rigorous best practice in its communications with residents regarding subcontractors with them, especially those in highways? Thank you.
I think that's a really good point, and yes, in short, and I think it's about a number of things. Is that where we, and this is not just for this is not for highways. I think it's as relevant for any part of the council, in that yes, where we deploy a third party to deliver that function for us, that actually there's that clarity in terms of, and I think you will see this in the fees and charges policy, but there is a clear expectation. There you are, thank you. There is a clear expectation, and hence support in terms of what that minimum level of transparency is. So really the voice and the relationship is council resident. It's not council third party resident in that sense. We need to, it needs to stay as that. But yes, we acknowledge that actually in our conversations, in our service level agreements, and with other factors, there's a level of consistency across the whole organisation in what we expect our subcontractors do, and therefore again that will be enhanced through our procurement activities, but also being mindful and acknowledging that the customer experience and the customer satisfaction is as much as part of this than it is just delivering the function. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you, AJ. Thank you for the presentation, the straightforward way you answered the questions. We're going to move on to the recommendation now. We've got quite a long agenda in front of us. The recommendation reads as follows. The Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the report and specifically asked to consider the following, advising on matters that could enhance the programme impact: the different aspects of commercial programme and the draft policy on the application of fees. I know we haven't discussed the draft policy. It's there for everyone to read, but it is literally a draft policy. Can I have agreement that we pass those minutes? That recommendation.
I move that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's been passed and hopefully seconded. Good. Right. So thank you, AJ. I know it's really interesting and exciting. You can stay here till 4 o'clock if you wish, but we're going to move on to the next item now.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Okay. So the next item is item 5, starts on page 35, and it's the public realm agreement. So we have County Councillor Charlie Edwards, who's the portfolio holder for Highways and Transportation, Donnell, John Davis, and Mr. Ridwan. I understand that Mus is going to take us through a presentation, and again, if you could leave it to the end, ask questions if you feel you need to. And I'm delighted to say that you've all got extremely colourful presentation in front of you, which has got lots of colours on it. And of course, being the chairman, mine's all in grey and white. So when you say the green square, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Okay, we move on. Ridwan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ridwan Musa, the Highway Service Manager for Operations, and I've got a presentation for you this morning that just gives you a brief overview of the public realm agreements that we have with the district councils. A little bit of background: as far back as I can remember, 2003, when the first public realm agreements were written, as the highway functions were transferring from the district councils to Lancashire County Council Highways. With the County Council being the highway authority in Lancashire by virtue of the Highways Act, the County Council has powers to arrange for the discharge of its functions. So for certain parts of these functions, it has arranged, made arrangements with the district councils, who then has the power to discharge. And this is all done in accordance with the Local Government Act of 1972. And in that respect, both Lancashire County Council and the District Council entered into an agreement, and again in accordance with the Local Government Act of 72, and more recently of the Act of 2000. So, what does the agreement cover? In terms of who does what, it covers the County Council's duties and responsibilities. It covers the District Council's duties and responsibilities, the personnel that are involved in terms of administering this agreement, what the reimbursement looks like, what the health and safety arrangements needs to be. There's clauses in there that cover termination arrangements, property and records, and there's quite a comprehensive document, and it covers a lot more to ensure both parties to this agreement are covered in terms of any risks. The work areas mainly cover the grass cutting on the highway and verges and the roundabouts. It covers weed control on a planned and a reactive basis. It also covers for the remove and disposal of leaf, and that's particularly relevant, of course, in the autumnal season. Also covers removal and disposal of windblown sand, obviously only applicable particularly in the Fylde coast. It covers the maintenance of trees, maintenance of the shrubs and hedges where they are highway hedges. And in terms of the specification, it all boils down to the highway management plan that we have set out in our asset management plan. And there is also an element that allows some permissive tasks that is at the request of the district councils. There is no additional funding to this area, but it allows the district councils, depending on their sort of public realm policy targets, allows certain activities to be agreed upon and allowed. So the specification, as I've said, it does boil down to our highway management plan, and it's broken down into what is expected within that specification. So, for example, the amenity grass cutting, our highway management plan asks for 8 cuts per year, and just to add that it was previously 4. I think it was in 2017 when it changed. We also have the rural high-speed flail cutting, and the specification asks for 4 cuts per year, and it was previously 2. There is the weed control, and that is both done on a planned basis twice a year, and any other reactive responses that are needed. And again, previously it was 1 planned weed control, and then the rest of it was done on a reactive basis. Tree work, any highway trees that require attention, either crown lifting, cutting back, is done on a reactive basis. Hedges and shrubs, again, any sort of matters that are affecting the safety of the pedestrians and the users is done on a reactive basis. And I mentioned earlier, leaf sweeping for to keep the roads clear and the gullies clear, hopefully, is over the autumn and the winter months as required. So there is a little bit of a mismatch in terms of who does what. And that table shows you, as for all the asks within the agreements, what the district councils do and what Lancashire County Council highways pick up. It has evolved over the years. The original intention was that all these items were part of the agreement and picked up as part of the collaborative agreement with the district councils, but things evolve. Activities change within different councils, priorities change, and some activities are now undertaken by Lancashire Highways, and some activities are retained by the district councils. Funding to the districts. There has been a reduction in funding for the districts over the last 10 years, and I think it all started off, to my first knowledge, during the start of the austerity measures. Significant reductions throughout the years, but we were all faced with the same challenges in terms of, whilst these reductions were taking place, the challenge for everybody, not just Lancashire, not just districts nationally, was to look at how we can increase efficiencies and improve performance. What we did benefit from in 2017, that we undertook a tendering exercise that covered all the items that we have described, that's covered in the public realm agreements. And in order to put some logic behind the funding levels to each one of the districts, we applied the competitive rates that we received from a private contractor, and applied those rates to the areas of grass cutting that we have associated with each district council. We also factored in the extra cuts that I mentioned, and we also factored in some additional weed killing that was specified in the highway management plan. And where those costs didn't quite match up, so long as it was evidenced at the time, or even based on an annual review, we did match the costs, again, provided it was significant evidence and support behind that. So what does the funding look like to the districts? I could only go back to 2013, and as you can see, there's a trend there showing the reductions throughout the austerity years. And in 2017-18, moving into 18-19, that's where we did the tendering exercise, and you can see there's been a jump for most authorities, and significant for some. And that's where we did the tendering exercise and actually looked at the funding levels that we have with the district councils. That took us to a 3-year agreement, and last year that 3-year agreement was a fixed 3-year agreement with no inflationary increases whatsoever. However, from this year, the intention was that has been that there is an inflationary increase now going forward for the next 5 years.
Thank you for that. It would be remiss of me not to refer to page 44, the excellent improvement in the number of times the grass cutting, both community highways, etc., weed control. That is appreciated, certainly in my division, by the residents, and I've actually had emails confirming that, where previously I was getting emails of complaints. So that's a really good point. Now, before I actually open it up to questions, we've got Councillor Charlie Edwards, the portfolio of highways, with us. Would you like to say anything before I get the questions going, Charlie?
No, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to people's questions and people's feedback on the service and anything we can do to improve it. Yeah, interested to hear people's feedback, and I'll do a wrap up at the end, I think.
Okay. First question from Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I think Lancaster-based county councillors are very excited about this item. People may remember from the slides that you've just seen that Lancaster District Council appears to be the only council that doesn't do weeding on behalf of the county council. This decision was taken, I think, a couple of years back now. Thank you. And I'm kind of surprised to discover that Lancaster's the only one, because the public realm team at the City Council felt that they just couldn't do what needed to be done on the resourcing provided by the County Council. And I understand that that the County Council then had difficulty finding another supplier. I know that Councillor Edwards, and officers are probably aware of this because they've sat with Lancaster City Council to discuss this further, but just for scope for people. So the City Council did a very classic old-fashioned time and motion study as to look at what it would take to properly clear an area that was 285 metres long and 4 metres in width, which apparently took 13.5 hours. So then we get some awesome statistics that suggest that there are 65,000 odd miles of road in Lancaster District that might need weeding, and that this might take 9,840 hours. That's enough of the really big numbers. I think as a scrutiny committee, I think there's a really interesting thing. As Charlie well knows, our residents are miserable about the state of their streets and roads, and I know the funding pressures that we are all under. But one of the reasons that we have such a big problem is actually about the maintenance of roads and footpaths and curbsides. Plants don't grow on footpaths that are sealed. They grow through the cracks in the pavers. They grow through the potholes in the roads. And I know we're working on all of these things, but I'm not sure at what point not doing the maintenance to ensure the weeds can't grow through roads and pavements might actually be costing us more than it would to weed them. Because I suspect filling them is faster than weeding them, particularly given that, one of the reasons Lancaster City Council handed back the work was around the use of glyphosate. So, because of health concerns, people weren't willing to do that anymore, which means weeding has to be done manually. And there was an exciting research project with Lancaster University that looked at different means of trying to do it, but hand weeding comes back as getting the best result. So I'm interested to hear the response from officers and Councillor Edwards about the ongoing discussions with Lancaster City Council, but also really interested to hear from other scrutiny members about whether this is an issue that they share sentiments about in their districts. And I did wonder, and I do know that COVID and resourcing will have an impact on this, and I know it's later on the agenda, but whether this is an item that might be well served by a task and finish group, because I think there might be some ways that we need to rethink how much this kind of work costs us, both in terms of, should we do more maintenance so that we spend less weeding, but also should we think about how we value our assets differently. Lancaster City Council has recently mapped every bit of grass in the district and made decisions about how they would be maintained and where we would aim for greater biodiversity growth and all of that kind of thing. So, coming back to the questions asked during the commercialisation item about how do we balance financial issues versus environmental versus social, and I wonder if that might be a useful thing for us to explore in more detail through a task and finish group in a way that might then help all of us deliver a better public realm for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, or do you want to leave it to Councillor Edwards?
I'll just pick up on that point and just say that there is obviously exceptional circumstances in Lancaster with regards to the fact that there was the delay in the service being procured. That meant that when I first took on the portfolio, Lancaster and Morecambe in particular was an urban jungle, and it was in my backyard, and it was a really embarrassing way to start the new job. And I would just say that we have now got in place the supplier to start have been carrying out those sprays. We have our sprays already programmed in for this year, so that the issue that we saw last year, we do not anticipate, expect, or want it to happen again. And I've made this extremely clear that I never want to see what I saw last year happen ever again, and the teams have responded really positively to that. So I would just say that it's a great example of why you need to look at the county in the round and services in the round, and a one size fits all approach never works. And where it's working in every other area, you know, you literally go drive down the A6. As soon as you get to Cockerham, you go into a wire district and the weeds disappear. And it's really embarrassing for Lancaster district-based highways nerds like you and I. So that's something that I think we've got a really good program booked in for this year to stop this from happening again. So whilst I think a task and finish group might be useful to look at weeds, it might be more beneficial for a wider scope of a task and finish group to look at all of the issues of rural roads, specifically, full stop, and the issue of public realm and green verges.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
I'd certainly
Down that route, I'd be grateful if we could maybe widen the scope. Yeah, but yeah, so that in answer to your question, I see last year as an outlier and Lancaster as an outlier within last year. So watch this space. And I don't know if any of the team want to add anything in particular about the weed spraying for this year.
Yeah, Councillor Edwards, you're absolutely correct that there's suppliers in place. Tender exercise has been undertaken, and you know we will be ready to go. And also we've also been having conversations with Lancaster City staff, Mark Davis, Will, and Carly, I think Public Realm Manager, to make sure that you know whatever happened last year doesn't happen. So we're working very closely together with staff at Lancaster City as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lewis has just sent a message saying a task and finish group would be a good idea, appropriate. So there is a process to ensure that we start and consider a task and finish group, and I'm sure you're aware of it. If not, the officers will help you when this meeting's finished. Can I just ask the remaining people who've got their hands up to be succinct with their question? We don't want speeches, thank you very much. Questions to the officer. As I say, we've got more items on the agenda which we need to discuss shortly. So I move on now to Councillor Fewings.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't take any offence to the fact that you always give that warning about being succinct just before I speak. I just want to thank Councillor Lewis for raising the question that we all wanted to ask, but I just want to go a little bit further, really, just because now we've had the reply. You know, it's great that Councillor Edwards thinks that we won't need to have these issues again, but I think the key issue that was sort of missed in that was just around the fact that poor maintenance of the public realm is actually causing the weeding problem in the first place, and celebrating that we're now spraying glyphosate everywhere is not where we want to be. Where we want to be is to have proper maintenance, which actually reduces the need to do the weeding in the first place, because remember that, you know, there are studies that link glyphosate with all sorts of things, including obviously killing bees, which are now protected. So what I'd like to see really in the task and finish group is a cooperation really with districts as well, because as we've seen, although there's only one council, there are different councils, different approaches here. So getting the feedback from some of the districts would be really helpful on what's needed, how we're going to finance it, and also the crucial thing of biodiversity, which is often lost in the argument of just, you know, weeding everything and cutting all the verges. I think that's a really important point that we need to pick up, is biodiversity, how that fits into all of this. Bringing that on to my other point, my other question, is in relation to rural verge cutting. It looks like Burnley is one of those that doesn't take care of that itself, and we do have a lot of problems in the rural areas of Burnley where the verges aren't being looked after. That's not necessarily verge cutting. Sometimes leaving it for biodiversity with appropriate signage saying, you know, that we're leaving this for pollinators or wildflowers and things like that can work. But at the moment, it's definitely not working in Burnley. And I'd be interested to hear from some of the others whose districts aren't carrying this out as to whether that is working, you know, for them. So I guess I'd like to ask is, you know, what is the county's approach to that when the responsibility is not being delegated to the districts? And then my final point really, and again, maybe this could go into task and finish group, but maybe it is a separate task and finish, because obviously the point of a task and finish group is to focus in on areas. So if you widen it up too much, sometimes that's not helpful. But just to pick up on the parking on grass verges, because those grass verges can be rural and they can be pretty urban and residential. And I've raised in the past that, you know, in relation to basically tripping hazards, and we're putting ourselves at risk from personal injury claims essentially, because we have, you know, a millimetre guide to when you might maintain the pavements, and we all have our views on whether that is strictly followed. But in relation to grass verges, you can literally have like deep gouges in the grass that are, you know, a whole ruler's depth, where people, you know, vulnerable people could trip, children could be playing on the grass verges and trip, and, you know, that is a disaster waiting to happen. So I've mentioned it before, and I'd just like to mention again, can we look into bringing in those sort of eco paving grids so that we are able to maintain the grass, because we don't want to see that removed from both an aesthetic and a biodiversity perspective, but also so that we reduce the amount of maintenance and also the risk to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ridwan, can you comment on that?
Yeah, in terms of the hazards in the grass verges, those areas are part of our form part of our highway safety inspections. And should our highway inspectors find anything or deep ruts, they do instruct the highways team to make good the highway verges. And again, you know, I would just say that if there are any verges that anybody does see, please report them, particularly if they're a hazard, and we'll get those addressed as quickly as we can. We are talking about maintenance, and you know, on the face of it, putting these grass grids, or lots of different terminologies that exist out there, on the face of it are a good idea, but it's one that we need to speak to our asset team, and we need the necessary funding to be able to do that. But from a maintenance perspective, our priority is always to remove the hazard in the first instance.
Thank you for that. We move on now to Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm questioning your cuts in the rural areas, and you say you're going from 4 to 8, and that's very progressive, and I'm up for it. Now then, the road, the A584 between Wharton and Lytham, it is briding with Wharton's Parish Council's boundary that you maintain. And will that be 4 cuts in future, or will it be 8? I ask this because the Parish Council have in the past been responsible for the mowing of it, but the County Council insisted that the Parish Council pick the grass up. So we gave it to County Council back, and they didn't pick the grass up. So we told them to pick the grass up, and they assured us they weren't doing, and it was reduced down to 4 cuts, and I think this past couple of years it's been less than that, in all honesty. So that is what I'd like. And also, where do the villages fit in with the plan? A lot of villages, parish councils would want to take on the responsibility, I feel sure, of the grass cutting of their parish boundaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Yeah, so just to be clear, the amenity grass areas, so these amenity grass areas are very much sort of urban locations. Those are the ones that get cut 8 times per year and gone up from 4. The rural and the high-speed roads are done by what we call a flail cut, and those are the ones that only get done 4 times a year. So that just to be mindful about that one. In terms of the parish councils, we actually do have some parish councils who do the grass cutting and the maintenance for themselves, and those parish councils do get an amount of funding from Lancashire County Council to enable them to do that. So if there are any parish councils, Councillor Rigby, that would be interested to take on that responsibility, I more than welcome that approach, and it's all about that community engagement that I'm really supportive of.
Thank you for that, and I have Brining with Wharton as my example, but that's all it is. If they wanted to cut the road to Lytham 8 times a year, well, what would your view be on that as the county council?
Yeah, we need to make sure that it fits the criteria, Councillor Rigby. We can provide the funding for equivalent to 4 cuts. Yeah. If the parish council then wishes to up that, which I know a lot of parish councils, the parish councils do that, and I know a lot of the districts actually cut more than what we actually specify. So there's absolutely no reasons why that can't happen.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield.
Thanks very much. I'll try to be as succinct as some other members have been, even more possibly, especially as the software update is going to cut off my corporate laptop in a not too distant future. Quite honestly and frankly, with due respect, at least in parts of Ribble Valley, the operation on the ground, if you'll forgive the pun, is not fit for purpose, and it hasn't been for some time. And I think the idea of having a further look at this, and not just on weed control, but the whole thing, may be a good idea. But the risk is possibly, unless I can be assured otherwise, that setting up a task and finish group, as for example Councillor Lewis is suggesting, hopefully that will just not keep kicking this problem down the road, so to speak. It needs to be grasped and made better. And I would have thought the time now, when we're coming up to budget setting by the Cabinet and the full Council next month, is the time to look at this funding, for example. Because as Mr. Russo referred to when he mentioned about austerity measures, and he presumably is referring to the fact that in that large A3 sheet of the funding, it was as much in 2013-14, and perhaps it had gone down by then, I don't know, of 1.6 million. I mean, for the current financial year, it's down to 1.2 million. And among that, it's noticeable that Ribble Valley, for whatever good or bad reason, is only about 32,000 in the current year. But the other thing is, when you compare that with Lancaster, I'm not saying Lancaster shouldn't be as much as 166,000, but like Lancaster, Ribble Valley is one of the largest, if not the largest, subject to comparing with Lancaster, geographic areas with lots and lots of roads, and where weed control, etc., and verges, etc., need maintaining. And I'm just puzzled why it's so low amount, because sometimes I'm a go-between, although I'm not a borough councillor as well as a county councillor, but the Ribble Valley Director of Community Services often replies to me when I raise issues, local issues about work not being done, that they've not got enough money, and when it runs out, they just can't do these extra cuts on weed control, etc., etc. And I think the two heads of the offices need to get together between LCC and the districts, especially Ribble Valley, because it's also very confusing to people, including parish councils, especially those that don't have a lengthsman, don't do it work themselves, and this work just seems to fall between the county council and the district. I think Ribble Valley has about 30 odd very many parish councils, but what they do varies, and it's not consistent, and it's a mess, to be honest, and it just needs to be looked at. And I think now is the best time, with the budget coming up, to just re-look at this 1.2 million. Should it be increased or revised as to how it's allocated? But I think it clearly, if Ribble Valley is a good example, it needs to be increased. I could speak more on it, but it is a big area and it needs to be sorted out.
So thank you, Councillor Schofield. And yeah, the figure for Ribble Valley is probably the lowest, but just want to put this table back up, and yes, Ribble Valley is very much a rural area with very little sort of built up areas. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's very little. And as you can see, the rural flail cutting and the high speed cutting is done by Lancashire County Council. So if Ribble Valley were doing all the works, it would be reflected in the budget, if you see what I mean. But a lot of the work is done by Lancashire County Council Highways, or through highways through a subcontract arrangement.
Thank you for that. Next question from Councillor Dowding. And can we keep to questions, please, rather than speeches?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I just do want to say, firstly, thank you so much for having this as an item on the agenda, and for everybody's input and Ridwan's presentation. But also on behalf of Lancaster City Council, as a dual-hatted member, we have been really pleased that we've had these conversations with county officers and a willingness to look at this and work collaboratively together and see how we can come to, some improvements, because it did really feel like we were in a crisis, as Councillor Edwards says. So in terms of the question, I want to support this idea of the task and finish group, because I think it's on the agenda now, and it could take a long time before we come back to this issue. And there's a lot of thinking going on at the moment. So supporting what Councillor Schofield said, I think there are budget issues, no doubt, because I think when Ridwan started, you explained that this first got set up nearly 20 years ago now, and so there's so much scope to have a deeper look at what actually is being done, by whom, and what's needed. And there won't be a one size fits all, or there won't be a template for every single district. And I think that's what's needed. Is some districts will still be wanting their bulbs and flowers in certain areas, and there's others moving away more to or quicker, like we are in Lancaster, to sort of buy, wildflower meadows in some area, etc. And then there's the difference, like it's not just the amount of money, it's what's actually happening for that amount of money. So I hope that we can have a task and finish group, and that maybe would, well, I did actually write some suggestions, but that we would look not just at the financial, but the environmental biodiversity issues, particularly our approach to weeds, looking at public perception and satisfaction, all based on, the whole essence of it would be working together with districts. What's the scope for improving collaboration based on a sort of much deeper look and evidence base of what's actually required now for the public realm, and how can we then respond to that and look at it, you know, who's doing what and how that works out. And from Lancaster District's part, our staff, because obviously it's almost impossible for county to do this. It's such a huge area. You know, we must work with the districts, and Lancaster staff officers, we're very, very keen to be involved in, say, if there was a pilot, maybe we did it with 3 or 4 districts and did some shared experience. We've got quite a lot of evidence because of that piece of work we did, as Councillor Lewis said, on the Grantlands management survey. You know, so we've built up that we could share how we went about it. So that was my suggestion, that we actually drill down into what's really needed now. It's 20 years on, but to say thank you for this piece of work that you've done so far, and let's carry it on, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dowling. As I said earlier, I think to Councillor Lewis, there is a process to start a Dress and Finish group, and if people are interested in having such a group, which I think is quite a good idea, then start the process as soon as possible, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss it at the next committee meeting. Thank you. Ridwan, do you want to comment on anything Councillor Dowling said?
No, there's nothing there that you know, I don't disagree with. It's 2003 is coming up to 20 years, and yeah, you know, people's priorities do change, local communities change. You know, our vision for Lancashire has changed over the years, so it's probably a good time to have a review, and yeah, let's get our neighbourhoods looking as best as we can with the money that we have available.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hine.
Can I just come in? Is that okay if I have a quick word?
Sorry?
Yeah, it's filled in out. Just a very quick
Yes.
word.
Okay.
I just had to really confirm that, Councillor Dowling, that the great work the officers have done with Lancaster and Lancaster University, looking at new ways of working and you know, innovative ways of working, that we must build on that. There's been some really good work already done, and I think that can only just go from strength to strength with those sort of relationships. And you're right, we need to do it with a number of districts, not just Lancaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I intended to bring the officers in, including Charlie, at the end of this particular session before we move on to the next item. But
Sorry, Chair.
Obviously, no problem. So, Councillor Hine.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor O'Toole and Ridwan. I've just had an interesting email from a Ribble Valley officer, so I'm following on a little bit from Councillor Schofield, who doesn't believe there is a public realm agreement between LCC and RVBC. So the question is being asked, where is the current documented commitment and where might it be found? And when it is, please may they have a copy.
Thank you. So each one of the districts was sent a copy of the public realm agreement through the local district teams, and everybody should have a copy. And what I can't answer at the moment is when that was sent, so I can dig some information out and come back to you.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Sorry, I forgot to put my face on. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
What on earth is that?
Have we lost the chair?
No, I'm asking Councillor Singh to unmute.
I think that's you, John Singleton.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do beg your pardon. Sorry, I lost a connection earlier on. I'm sorry. So, thank you, sir. You can possibly just explain something to me. Some villages in Fylde West do their own grass cutting. For example, there's Staining, who receive £622 from Lancashire County Council, but it costs us at best value £10,000 to do the work. Shouldn't the county be providing the full amount of money for the grass cutting? That's question one. And there's another village, Ellswick Village, a smaller village, who received 1,059. Can you explain the different variations for me?
So in terms of the first question, like I said earlier, that we at the moment Lancashire County Council provides funding based on the specification that we have in the Highway Management Plan, and local parishes and district councils may choose to up that specification, and that really is a choice. But to be consistent right across the board, our funding is based on our Highway Management Plan and the number of cuts that that we expect as far as that management plan is concerned. In terms of the differences, the payments is based on the area of grass cutting, like I explained earlier. If there are any discrepancies, and if there are, the parishes can provide some information as to what areas of grass that they are looking after. I'm happy to look at that and see if the funding streams are funding levels are correct.
Right, thank you. I will do that, and I will come back to you.
Okay,
thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for that. Ridwan, do you want to comment on that?
Chair, I've just commented on that one.
Oh, sorry. I had a conversation with one of the officers. I didn't hear it. Sorry. Councillor Wesley, next.
Thank you, Chairman. Strictly speaking, it doesn't. What I'm going to ask doesn't fit in with what we're actually talking about, but it's about trees on the highway, in the verge. A question to officers: am I correct in thinking that we're not replacing them? There's been some comment in the local press that trees haven't been replaced, and I've also had discussions with local residents myself on this subject within the last week. And I'm just perhaps to you, Chairman, if you're going to set up a task and finish group, could they look at trees as well and the sort of the cost involved in replacing trees? Because it is an issue locally in your division, in fact, Chairman.
Yes, I appreciate that, and as you know, I've quite a number of trees outside my own house, some of which are in a very poor state of repair, and I can never get to the bottom of who's responsible for maintaining them, and that is a problem. So there's no problem in including trees with the task and finish group. In fact, so many items have been raised during this report. I think when we decide to go with the task, we look at this report and include the items that have been of concern to members that need to be looked at, because there's certainly, as far as the public realm is concerned, there's certainly a lot of problems that members of the public bring to our attention and councillors bring to the attention of highways. So I think Councillor Lewis's suggestion earlier on was a good one. That's somebody honking their horn outside. It's nothing in this office. So yeah, we'll go ahead with that. I'm going to, Councillor Singleton, you want to come back?
Yes, please, Chair, yes. Concerning trees, you may not be aware of it, but there was a tree felled in Little Eccleston, and I had lots of conversations with Wes, the tree officer, and supplied all the information, who cut the tree down, the contractor, and unfortunately legal won't take any action on the offenders. And I think that this sets, if you like, a scene for anyone to fell trees, because no action will be taken against them by the county councillor. And I think this softly approach is not doing any good to, if you like, maintaining trees in the current position. You may not be aware of that, but just to let you know. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Jolly.
Do you want me to make some
sorry,
points, Mr. Chairman?
We have to ask the officers, and you in particular, to sum up before we move on to the next item.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, just want to just pick up on a few points that have been raised. Firstly, thank you very much for everyone's engagement in this item. It is one of the most important council functions, and it accounts for 0.00% of the council's annual budget. However, it really is so important to people, their well-being, and also just the general aesthetics of the place. In terms of some of the points that have been raised, Councillor Fewings raising some really good points, and as I say, this I think is part of our emerging work for a rural road strategy, which is something that I'm really keen on pursuing. I think that could be the focus of the task and finish group. Parking on verges was a really good point that you raised. There was an item that came to cabinet yesterday where we've introduced a red route clearway in Parbold, and part of that was that we actually made the red route not just the highway but the entire width of so it included the verge, so you could actually get done for parking on the verge as well as parking illegally on the road. So we're wanting to introduce more of those. I noticed in the document it says the phrase high speed flail. That's not a pun about the government's transport policy. That's not something that we're building to Manchester. But it is obviously it's an important task that we carry out, and it's something that again I think it goes back to the point that Councillor Hind raised, which is about it would be useful for the county councillors to know exactly who does what. I think this is a really useful slide, and I think it's important that as councillors we are aware in our respective areas of exactly the agreements that have been put in place. Councillor Rigby raised an absolutely very important point about parishes. And I think that this is one of the items that we're going to be raising at the forthcoming parish, the Lauk Highway Special meeting that we've got here, which is we've got the meeting of the local association of local councils. So we're going to have the highway special, and we're definitely going to add that onto the agenda. So thank you for raising that. Councillor Schofield made the point about let's not miss this opportunity, and let's not allow the task and finish group to let this get into the long grass. I couldn't believe you missed that pun there. I thought you were going to say it. You missed a great opportunity there. But no, in seriousness, it is very important. It is a pressing budgetary request, and it's something that I'll take on board and get back to you on. Councillor Dowding made some really important points, and one of the most important things that you said, Gina, was about public perception and satisfaction. And I go back to my earlier point. We have all seen social media posts of a weed somewhere, and they go, what the bloody hell do we pay our council tax for? This is so important that we get this right, and I think it's great that you raised that, and it's something that I think we need to be particularly conscious of when we're having this conversation. What is it that people want to see? And in your question that you said in the earlier slide, what does success look like? And for me, success looks like an area where the public are actually, we bring them with us throughout this, and we make sure that we do have a good area that everyone's proud of. And I'm really pleased that you raised, as Phil's acknowledged as well, really pleased that you acknowledged the work that Lancaster are doing. I'm very keen on Lancaster being the outlier for the right reasons in future. So yeah, really grateful for the time that the Lancaster officers have worked on this with us. John Singleton, again, your points are really great. Specifically again, should be raised at the parish conference. So make sure that your parish councils are attending the LAUC conference. I think it's really important that we get good buy-in at that forum. And then David Wesley made some really good points about trees. I think there is a potentially a whole other piece of work really on trees. You've got the stuff about the TPOs, who's responsible for what tree where. In the earlier point that Erica made about do the weeds only come because there's cracks in the footpaths, or if the cracks in the footpaths been caused by the weeds? It's very much a chicken and an egg situation, and I think both things need to happen at the same pace. And trees are a big cause of the uprooting of flags and footpaths and stuff. So we have got to make sure that we manage trees properly. I was on a road in Preston. I was taken to Powys Road in Preston by Councillor Nwida Khan a couple of weeks ago. And, the trees are amazing. It's a beautiful avenue. It's a tree-lined street. It's one of Lancashire's finest, but it's causing problems, which means that people can't use the footpath really now. So it is about managing trees properly. So again, some really good points. I've made a lot of notes, and I'll take them all away. But yeah, I think it'd be really useful, Mr. Chairman, if maybe we can have a conversation after this meeting and set out some ideas about what a task and finish group would look like and what would be best for you, and obviously best for the council and for the districts as well. So really excited to work on this project with all colleagues. So thank you very much, everyone, for your feedback. It's been really useful today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just Councillor Wesley mentioned my division. I'm fortunate enough to live in a road that has trees on both sides in most of the road, which are beautiful, but they're just not maintained. And the result is that at the present moment, of course, there are no leaves on them, which of course is a problem when they drop, of course. But during the summer, the foliage is so heavy because they've not been maintained for many, many years that they actually block out any visibility from the streetlights. The streetlights are in the midst of the trees, and there's just very little illumination onto the pavement of the highway from the streetlights. So you've got a catch-22 situation there. And they were maintained up to about 20 years ago. Regularly, we'd see people coming and pruning them. That just doesn't happen anymore. So we're going to move on to the next item, but before we do that, we need to take the recommendation. Oh, sorry, before I do that, Phil, did you want to comment?
No, that's fine. Sorry, Chair, I jumped in a bit soon there before. That was all I wanted to cover, really.
Nice to see you're eager. John Davis, are you happy? You want to say anything?
No, I've nothing to add. Thanks, Chair. I'll just say with public realm agreements are extremely important to us in highways.
Right.
They really do help us out in terms of maintaining the appearance of local community areas. So we do recognise their importance, and we want to develop them if we can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holgate's put his hand up, even though we're moving on to the recommendation. So quick one, please, Steve.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you, Chairman. And the reason I've put my hand up is because I didn't really want to, because there's such a lot of conversation going on. I just want to make sure that when Charlie and co are looking at the task and finish group, that the comments that I've made in the chat section, along with quite a few other people, which are really relevant and equally as pertinent as those that have been articulated, are taken into account. That's all, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move on to the recommendation. The recommendation reads as follows. That the Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the presentation provided by Highway Service on public realm agreements, provided in Appendix A, and consider whether public realm agreements need to be looked at in further detail in the future. Desire to impact on further identify the appropriate next steps. I think we've decided to do that anyway.
I'll move that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Shadwick. Thank you very much for that. So we move on to the next item now, which I will turn to in a moment. And that's welcome Councillor David Wesley, who's the chairman of the Budget Scrutiny Review Panel. There's a presentation starting at page 1. David, when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's just a note of our last meeting, which was held on the 2nd of November 21. And as included in the recommendations is a request for the terms of reference to be looked at again. So the panel can look at approved items in the budget for budget growth, making sure that they're carried through and properly implemented. The main item on the agenda of the meeting was a Money Matters report for Q2, and that was presented by Neil Kinnick, a very detailed report and a good presentation. It's projecting, it gave the projected deficit for the next sort of 3 years, but also detailed that there were adequate reserves available. So the County Council, whilst there's a lot of work still to be done, is in a good position, good sound financial position. We should have had a meeting on the 19th, 2 days ago, but that's been deferred because the next Money Matters report and budget report is going to a later cabinet meeting. We're now meeting on the 2nd of February, when the real work of the panel will start. In the Money Matters report, it detailed that 29 million of savings haven't been delivered in 2021, and there'll be a further 12 million previously agreed for this year that won't be delivered, so they need to be addressed. Most of those are in adult social care, and the reason for that is largely the effects of the pandemic and the need to concentrate on the urgent matters. And that's basically the report. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Not on the Money Matters report, I beg. That was very detailed.
Okay, so members of the Scrutiny Committee are obviously welcome to ask questions. We have in attendance members of the Budget Scrutiny Committee, but of course they've been involved in the discussions anyway. So any members of the Scrutiny Committee, please feel free to ask questions of Councillor Wesley if you wish to, by show of hand, of course. Nobody's showing their hand, so thank you for your report. We'll move on to the next item, which is on agenda item 7 on page 57, and that's the internal scrutiny work programme.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt you, but there are 2 recommendations in the report that's come before.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm so surprised with no question. I've moved on too quickly.
I was pleasantly surprised.
Yes. So the recommendations are the internal scrutiny committee is asked to note the update by the Budget Scrutiny Review Panel following its meeting on the 2nd of November, and further to the request of the Budget Scrutiny Committee, consider updating the panel's terms of reference to include monitoring growth items under the role of review panel. That's been moved by Councillor Shedwick.
Can I second, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Thank you for that. So we agreed with that. We move on to the next item, which I mentioned before, which is the work programme. Just get to the page, right. So the work programme of the Internal Scrutiny Committee is attached to Appendix A. Topics include work programmes were identified at the joint work planning workshop in internal and external held on 9th of July, and the work programme for other scrutiny committees is attached. So any comments on the work programme from members of the Scrutiny Committee? Nothing there. Okay. It's quite a comprehensive list of proposals that we're making. So can we then move to the recommendation that the Internal Scrutiny Committee is asked to consider key lines of inquiry for future meeting topics, discuss any additional representation required to form key officers and cabinet members partners, and note the comment and the work programmes of any other scrutiny committees as appropriate. We have a proposer and a seconder.
Can I do that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you're proposing that. Seconded?
I'll second.
Councillor Shedrick has seconded. Thank you very much indeed. So I think that brings us to almost the end of this particular meeting, which has been very informative, I must say. I'll just go through the agenda correctly, which is item 8 of urgent business. There is no urgent business. And if we go to the turn over the page to 9, the date of the next meeting will be on the 4th of March. And hopefully we'll be back to normal in Cabinet Room B. And in the meantime, if you would like to consider the proposed task of finished group, what exactly we look at and what's possible for us to look at, then that will come to the committee and I'm sure we'll agree it. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the attendance of everybody, questions and particularly the officers. Thank you. Goodbye.
Well done, Chairman. Thank you very much.